goes. How's it going, everyone? Fargo SCHEELS Expert here, Matt Schneider, and today I want to talk to you about the rods that I love to pick up every time I go bass fishing. We'll start out with the Ned rig. So one thing I like about the Ned rig is I can bounce this around any structure I really need to. It does get clumped up with weeds at times, but I really like throwing this on offshore rock or offshore structure really, and it's really cool. I partnered up with that Z-Man Finesse TRD, and cool thing about that is it's a floating technology in the plastic, so it sits on the bottom just like so. And if you've ever seen a bass kind of come up and hit a lure, it comes almost vertical. It doesn't swim parallel to the bottom to eat. It actually comes down vertical on it. But so Ned rig is kind of like one of my go-tos. And then one of the rods that I like to throw it on is going to be a 7.3 medium light fast. I like a medium light rod, that way I feel the fish, but the fish doesn't feel me. So I'm able to get a good hook set on that. And then I'm partnering up that with a 3,000 size reel with a 12 pound Suffix 832 and a 12 pound fluorocarbon leader. So medium light rods are super fun, especially if you're using finesse tactics for bass fishing, and it's probably one of my go-tos, to be honest. Alright, next up is the chatterbait. I really like to throw a chatterbait on like a medium moderate rod, something that's not gonna force that bait to not work properly. So I use a medium moderate, usually in that 7 foot to 7.5 foot. It really kind of depends on the fisherman, but I really like throwing this on 15 pound fluoro and like a 6:1 gear ratio reel. So you want to really slow roll that chatterbait through and let that bait kind of work its magic. But essentially what a chatterbait is it's just going to be a bladed jig or a swim jig with a blade on the front of it. So I can throw this realistically on anything. I really like throwing it on like flats anywhere from like that 5 to 7 foot mark, and really just kind of slow roll it along the bottom. Works really good in weeds. I could either put a paddle tail trailer on it, or one trailer I really like to use is a Gary Yamamoto Zanko on the back of it, and you just rig it exactly like how you would a swim bait. So chatterbait can be very universal. It can also cover a lot of water. I usually really like to use it if I'm searching a new body of water or if I just want to go out and catch fish. So chatterbait is a very useful tool. Alright, rolling into probably one of my favorite ways to catch big bass is going to be my swim bait setup. So here I have a Megabass mag draft. I have the one that's already pre-installed with the treble on the front of it, but it really kind of depends on how big of a swim bait you're throwing. If you're throwing like big Huddlesons, or if you're throwing just these little mag drafts, you know, your rod kind of varies. You can get away with a medium heavy if you're throwing these little mag drafts, but if I'm throwing like a big Huddleson or like a big hard bait, I'm gonna want that heavy action rod. So I usually like my swim bait rods anywhere from 7.6. There are some really nice 8-foot swim bait rods as well, but basically how I have that partnered is I have a 7'4" medium heavy rod with a 30 pound fluorocarbon leader or fluorocarbon line, and then I'm throwing that on a 7:3:1 gear ratio. The gear ratio with a reel also matters a little bit, because if I'm throwing hard baits or big glide baits, I want a faster reel. I want like an 8:5:1 gear ratio. That way I can really get that bait to keep working. You don't want it to slow down by any means. Whereas like a mag draft or like a big paddle tail like this, I can get away with a 7:3:1 or even like a 6:6:1 gear ratio and really allow that bait to kind of glide through the water and wiggle that tail. So big swim baits are really fun to catch big largemouth and big smallmouth, and it's probably the most fun you'll have catching largemouth and smallmouth. Alright, we'll roll into one of my go-to setups for smallmouth bass, and that's going to be the Dropshot setup. So if you ever rigged a Dropshot or you don't know what a Dropshot is, it's essentially you're using a little Dropshot hook and you're adding a little weight below it. So, and the cool thing about a drop shot is you can add as big as leader as you want for this drop shot weight. So if I'm marking a bunch of fish like up shallow, they're like 15 feet and I'm fishing 25 feet, I can put a 10-foot leader on this if I so choose to. So that's kind of a cool thing. As soon as your weight hits the bottom, you know your bait's in the strike zone. It's probably one of my go-tos for smallies, but I have 2 rods rigged up with this at all times. I have a 7.2 medium light fast if I'm going to be casting, and then I have a 6.10 medium extra fast if I'm going vertical right beneath the boat. So you really never know what kind of situation you're in, but if you're kind of looking for a happy medium, check out that 7-foot medium fast action. That will be a really good rod for this. But I really like partnering this up with a 3,000 size reel and that 12-pound braid. So I get a little tricky with my drop shots. I'll choose my fluorocarbon leader depending on like how finicky the fish are. So I'll go like with a 12-pound fluorocarbon leader all the way down to a 6-pound fluorocarbon leader. It all just kind of depends on the fish. So, but a drop shot can be very useful around weeds, rocks, structure, realistically anything. And one big thing is that there's 2 different styles of drop shot weights. There's going to be the pencil size drop shot weight, and then there's going to be like the teardrop drop shot weight. Cool thing about it is that this pencil one works better in weeds. You're going to be able to lift that weight straight up and drop it straight back down in the weeds and keep that hook still up above them. Whereas a teardrop weight works really good around rocks and trees and stuff because it just bounces off them. It doesn't get stuck in between the little cracks of the rocks or the trees. So drop shot can be very useful and should be one of those go-tos for everyday bass fishing. Alright, we'll kind of roll into my next setup. So I really like a skipping or a football jig or any style of jig realistically for bass fishing. I really like this all-terrain tackle weed eater jig. Just grooves in the pencil reeds or if around docks, it really kind of maneuvers around the dock pilings. So I really like this jig, but there's 3 different styles of jigs. There's going to be the football jig, the skipping jig, and then the punching jig. So it really just kind of depends on what situation you're in, but I really like this if I'm going around structure, pencil reeds, docks, kind of you name it. It's kind of universal in my own opinion. But if I'm going to be throwing a jig, I really like a medium heavy setup. So I usually like a 7.3 medium heavy fast, and I usually partner that up with fluoro. So I'm usually using like a 30 to 40 pound fluorocarbon, and usually a faster reel. So the reel choice can be a little bit tricky, but I usually like using an 8-to-5 or an 8-3-to-1 gear ratio reel, something quicker so I can pick up on that line right away and then set the hooks. So jigs can be very useful around very different situations. It just determines on where you're at and what lake you're fishing. Last but not least, the Topwater. So Topwater is probably the most used bait across the nation, hands down. But the cool thing about Topwater is that there's so many different types of them. So you can use like a weedless frog, you could use like a spook, whopper plopper, or chopo, and I have one right here for you. Just something that moves and actually throws up water on top. But nothing is more exciting than seeing a largemouth or a smallmouth bass come up on Topwater. So I usually like to throw this on a heavy setup, probably like a 7-foot to 7.6 heavy fast usually. But it all just kind of determines on where you're going to be throwing it. So, and that's same with my line choice. If I'm going to be throwing this in lily pads or milfoil with a Topwater frog, I'm going to be wanting to use like that 50, 65 pound braid. Whereas if I'm throwing like a moving bait, you could probably get away with like a 30 to 40 pound braid. It really kind of depends. If you're looking for that happy medium, probably that 40 to 50 pound braid for your Topwater setups. But Topwater is super fun. I love throwing this in early mornings and late evenings. That's usually when the bass are most active on Topwater, but that doesn't mean that you can't catch them throughout the day. Alright guys, I appreciate everyone watching these tips. I hope that they were helpful, and make sure to shoot us in the DMs or in the comments or whatnot if you guys have any questions whatsoever. So we're always on here, we're always answering questions, but as always, stay mad at them.